stand for, but I can put my head on a block. Last night, just in pure lines in a speech, that is most definitely, not only did he start with the soldiers, he also came back to it again, and then laid out civil wars on the continent. He laid out Palestine, Ukraine, all of it, and that's the most that he's ever spoken in a SONA address about foreign policy, geopolitics, and where we stand in our relationship with the rest of the world.
How measured was it, Mandy and Tshidi? Because on the one hand, the president has got to balance it. Yes, you need to be firm and defend the sovereignty of your nation, but also you need to appreciate that this is a powerhouse. This is an economic powerhouse that you need. So you can't be reckless in how you respond. And I wonder what you made, Mandy, on how he contrasted sort of South Africa's values with President Donald Trump's politics when he said, I quote here, "We stand for peace and justice. We stand for equal rights for women. We stand for members of the LGBTQI plus community, not for the survival of the fittest." You don't need to even doubt what he was talking about there.
Yeah, I was quite clear in my prediction. You should never do predictions on the radio. I was quite clear about what I expected the president to do. I didn't expect him, I thought he wouldn't come out and say directly to the US President Donald Trump. There wasn't going to be a direct address of this. I never expected that. I've always expected the speech to be about the medium-term development plan and domestic issues. And I think the way he dealt with it was exactly as I expected him to do, in a kind of acknowledgement, like a tacit acknowledgement about our values and who we are as a country. I think what we required as a country was that stirring moment for us to rally around, to say we will not be bullied. These are our values. We stand for rights and justice and rights for all. And I think the way the president did that was exactly right. He couldn't ignore it entirely. I never expected him to ignore it entirely. But I also think he couldn't come out and say, in response to Marco Rubio's post this morning that he's not coming, he was never going to dedicate the whole speech to foreign policy and current affairs. These were domestic issues that needed to be addressed, and I think the way he did that was really good.
Tshidi, he also reaffirmed the support for even Palestine, for instance, because some analysts have even said this may have to do with South Africa's decision to go to the ICJ, but the president last night also taking a moment to say we still do support Palestine.
Standing by decisions.
Standing by that decision.
I think there is a recognition from many in our government that that Donald Trump and co are doing has nothing to do with land. I think you've got to recognize that even though it feels outside that they're idiots, they're not idiots. They know exactly what they're doing. You kind of start to see a well-coordinated plan, if you may. And I think the president also responds to that in essence. And it was important to bring Palestine into the conversation because in part it is that, isn't it? I've spoken to many insiders who've said to me, they don't believe South Africa understands what going to the ICJ actually meant for South Africa. That South Africa is not ready for the backlash. Excuse me. And I think that it was important to stand firm and to sound like a statesman, to sound like our president in recognizing and backing the decisions that have been taken by government and defending those decisions. So I do think that Palestine had to be part of the conversation. I think what's interesting for me, and that'll be the struggle, is because you've got to juggle G20, right? And the impact of a country like America behaving the way that it does on the G20, because you must hand over to them. Then he says, they will send representatives out in order to try and explain our decisions, who we are. I almost felt like that's the difficulty, because you right now as our president, you've told us who we are. You've told the world who we are. They're watching. There's a lot of scrutiny on us because people wanted to know how we respond to what's happening. But now, because you also do need to pander, because you have an economy to worry about, you also need to take into consideration the objectives that you have for this country to move it forward. So what do you do? So you must go out and you want to have a successful G20. So sending people out to go and explain our values, our decisions, becomes part and parcel of that balancing act.
I just felt like he's basically sending envoys to America. I mean, Europe has never misunderstood our values and principles. Asia has never misunderstood our values and principles. And I just think the president just didn't want to say, I'm sending envoys to the US, to DC again, because guys, how many times? Pakistan, has just been there. The former Minister of
Khumbudzo
Trade and
Ntshavheni, they
Industry,
went, yeah.
Khumbudzo Ntshavheni went. The president's security advisor, Sydney Mufamadi,
Sydney
went there.
Mufamadi, yeah.
There are so many groups of envoys who've gone to the US to explain exactly what these new envoys are going to do. And the question is, will Washington DC
effective?
open that door, and will it be effective? The GNU, Lindsay Dentlinger, I mean, you and I were talking about this mishap or confusion around the NHI.
Still not much clearer. I think we
Oh
were
my
waiting for
goodness.
Minister Ramaphosa this morning to clarify that.
So in a nutshell, there's a story that breaks about 2 days ago in News 24 that says there's a deal struck between Minister Marupini Ramaphosa and DA leader John Steenhuisen that there won't be a phasing out of medical aid. So basically, in simpler terms, the DA was celebrating this victory as we fought for medical aids. They are going to stand as they are, even when the NHI is implemented. And then I had Minister Aaron Motsoaledi on my show yesterday who said, what are you talking about? I know nothing about that. I was not even in that meeting. I was like, why were you not in that meeting? He's like, go ask those people who had the meeting without me. And then after Sona, I see Minister Marupini and I ask her, what is going on? And she's like, well, this is my responsibility to have conversations about the medium-term development plan. I was like, but how do you talk about NHI without the Minister of Home Affairs? She says, no, this involved me. And I called him. He knew about it. What a mess.
It's a complete mess. And it was quite interesting last night talking about the GNU. I mean, the president's, I suppose, he pandered to his main GNU partner in highlighting what they've managed to achieve in those ministerial portfolios. And I suppose we've got to give kudos where kudos is due, for example, in home affairs, etc. But what was very interesting was that portfolios like basic education, that is also the DA's, and this NHI matter, there was no clapping, there was no applauding for whatever the president had to say on those matters.
On the TV, I heard some boos. Were there boos in the House?
There were boos in the House, but everybody wasn't sitting exactly in a row. So people were sitting more, in a line towards the back per party. But there were very stony faces in the front line from the DA specifically when he was talking about the NHI, when he spoke about norms and standards that will be implemented for Bella, in comparison to when he was highlighting all the good things that have been achieved so far in portfolios that are run by that. So that was also the balancing act that he had to perform, but we are no clearer on the NHI. I mean, he was quite clear that implementation would begin this year. He did make reference of what that would entail in terms of an electronic health record, also kinds of standards and delivery standards for healthcare providers, but nothing was said about those private medical aids. So, we'll have to look to the minister today to explain.
It's going to explain that. Mandy, when you look at the GNU and this medium-term development plan that they've adopted, that sets the agenda for the next 5 years. So the priority areas, driving inclusive growth and job creation, reducing poverty, tackling the high cost of living, building a capable, ethical and developmental state. And of course, the most urgent task is to grow the economy. So as always, the president focusing a lot on that. And the bigger focus is going to be on this infrastructure funding, 100 billion.
But where's the money coming from?
So that's what
Clement?
business is saying is on the NHI specifically, there's still no clarity on where the money is coming from. And all of this infrastructure spending, all of these great big plans, where's the money coming from? The one thing that I definitely noticed in this speech was the president mentioned private funding more than I've ever heard him mention private funding before. And you could see the hand of the DA throughout the speech. In fact, I even said to Minister Dean McPherson after the speech, you could really tell that the hand of the DA was in the speech when it comes to infrastructure development, when it comes to the digitization of government and these great big plans to build the digital infrastructure as well. And the home affairs, education, on Bella and NHI, I think that he tread a very fine line, because on both of those he said we're going ahead with it. On NHI, he didn't say we're going to implement this year. He said we're going to begin the plans to implement. So I don't expect it to be in the budget, in the February budget. But I did see Busi Mavuso, who is going to be on the midday report today, saying that they still don't know where the funding is. So until they know that, government is not sustainable to fund it. So I think that he has to balance the interests of the factions within the ANC. He has to balance the interests of the tripartite alliance members and the DA when it comes to NHI. And I think he somehow managed to do that.
But also just in the budget, you're never going to see one figure that says so many million
1
for
trillion
NHI.
rand.
It's all couched in fixing hospitals,
Yes,
building
yes.
new hospitals. You've got to read in the lines, in the details, and government will say, well, we are implementing the NHI because we're laying the groundwork and we're fixing stuff, and this is all part of getting an NHI going. So then the argument is, we can't say NHI is not happening because it's happening in those little, those programs that you need to go and look specifically how they're spending money to set up the system.
Phase 1 has already started.
I just wanted to make a quick comment around Mandy speaking about private funding. I spoke to Matthew Parks from COSATU yesterday. You know how their views are very stern about the private sector and capital. But it was very different for me when he said to me, what really matters is building an economy and getting workers thriving. And that is the private sector, and we're very happy. It doesn't matter anymore what it comes from. It was a weird departure for me from what you often hear. And I've seen COSATU almost being on a different side, really, of the argument from the SACP and in its approach to the GNU overall. And I kind of saw that yesterday, where when it comes to trying to balance a different interest within the alliance partnership as well, he seems to continue to enjoy that support. I mean, I've spoken in the past to Zingisa Losi as well, again, where there seems to be a departure from the resistance you've seen on the one end and a willingness to give the GNU with the DA in the room a chance at working, as long as it gets the country moving, as long as it addresses the interests and the concerns that workers have.
Yeah, we also have to give credit where it's due. And I really think that the presidency's Operation Vulindlela has actually been quite functional. There's been progress there. I mean, the president yesterday spoke about, of course, the Energy Crisis Committee. That's a reason why we haven't had load shedding for about 300 days until last weekend. But that's success. Those are the fruits of the reform agenda and the reform program the president already put down about 2 years or so ago. So in terms of the positive green shoots, what are you guys looking at? I mean, Transnet seems to be making progress. The private sector is coming in to say, let's talk. Can we take over part of your rail? And then that creates a good competition. That's going to be good for Transnet itself, but for all of us as well that rely on it. In terms of positive things?
Well, I don't know how quickly that's going to happen, Clement, and I think we're going to see the DA bump heads on specifically on this logistics matter, because as far as we understand, the Cape Town port is not part of that immediate revitalization or private partnership plan, and it's going to bump heads not only with the mayor of Cape Town but also the DA agriculture minister, who will say we need this port working better to export for agriculture and things. So I think that battle is not completely over, but I don't know, Clement, that we have, I mean, the same topics are there all the time. We're talking about trains and we talk about electricity. I think water is almost going to become the newer shift, almost from electricity. Now that the lights are on, where are people getting water from? And I think the threat to withdraw licenses from service providers who are not providing, I think that needs to be watched as to how quickly is that going to happen and who are we replacing it with, because we know that sector is also very prone to the corruption. And on that point, it was one thing that I did think last night, as much as I said, as much as the president spoke the most he ever has on foreign policy, he spoke the least ever about corruption. I don't know if that was just my impression.
Yeah, I think he celebrated the state capture as per usual. He'll speak about state capture, but when he mentioned whistleblowers, I actually thought of Mandy, because Mandy,
our whistleblower
my
queen.
passionate advocacy campaign.
Hello, Mandy last night,
queen.
because we've heard him before, but then it kind of fell away.
Yes,
and then again, the attempts to try and actually bring in programs that protect whistleblowers shows that we can deal with corruption, those also fell to the wayside. So it coming up in his speech again yesterday was interesting for me. But the issue that I have with the speech, particularly around issues like that, is that then we don't see it followed by action, right? There's this massive trust deficit and the crisis of credibility of the messaging. So that's where my struggle was around corruption. I saw, just very quickly, I saw Dr. John Kloppe yesterday, and I said, well, all of you are tied, in essence, as the MK party to state capture allegations. He did touch a little bit on that they continue to celebrate it. And as expected, they'll go, oh, yes, but it's for some. It discriminates against everybody. They'll deal with corruption. You know, they say law enforcement has eyes in terms of dealing with particular people, but I did feel that he didn't go far enough. Again, going back to my original point, for me, it's all good and well to talk about it, even if you don't spend too much time. I'm interested in what you actually do
afterwards
in order to deal with the
well,
issue.
Mandy Wiener was typing very much last night when the president announced whistleblower protection bill will be introduced this
The
year.
queen of whistleblowing.
Are you writing another book about
Not
this?
about that. About other things. Not about that. So he gave a timeline on whistleblower legislation, which he hasn't done before, and I thought that was very important. He said, and we've been waiting for this legislation. It's been a long time coming.
It's
we
a
had
hangover
a
from
public
Lamola.
discussion document that was put out by the former Justice Minister Ronald Lamola. There's been a lot of public participation in that, and we really need this whistleblowing legislation. And he did say that the whistleblower protections bill would be introduced in Parliament during this financial year. The other point he also made was around the state capture. He said, we will ensure that the investigating directorate has access to all the evidence that it needs to prosecute. And this is the big fight that has been happening
That's literally
with
all you
the
can
Justice
do,
Department. And
yeah.
he is saying, effectively what he was saying was, we'll give them access to the state capture database. Give them access to the state capture database so that they can prosecute. They cannot prosecute if they do not have access.
You genuinely believe that?
Advocate Shamila Batoyi had to
Yeah.
issue a summons to the Justice Department last year to gain access to
Well, I
that
think
documentation.
it's about access, and then there's unfettered access. And I
And
think
that's
what
what
they
I think
are
that's the
looking
difference
for
for me.
is the unfettered
They want
access.
unfettered access,
Yes,
yeah.
I mean they want no holds barred, that they can just have access to everything, and to have to ask every time for every little bit of piece of paper is just
Which I understand,
counterproductive. Well, how
because
do you
government
know what's
systems are
all
old.
there if you constantly? You might not know. It's like going to a library and you can only look at 4 books, but you might get there and look at all the stacks and think, oh well, I didn't know that this was there. And how are they supposed to know? And then they get criticized for using the advocates who were part of the State Capture
State
Commission,
Capture Commission,
but they know what's there. So how do you ask for something if you don't know what's all there?
Yeah.
I don't see that
Okay.
being resolved
Well,
actually
yeah.
anytime soon, to be honest.
And the
That
new
back and
Justice
forth will
Minister now
continue.
has to take up
Has to
that
take up. Yeah,
battle.
I spoke to her about 2 weeks ago on the SABC. But we'll continue that chat after the latest in Eyewitness News headlines. It's 10:32.
It's simple.
Sona in 60 minutes with Clement Manyathela on 702. Let's walk the talk.
20 minutes before 11 o'clock. This is Sona in 60 minutes with EWN politics editor Tshidi Madia, EWN parliamentary reporter Lindsay Dentlinger, and the midday report host Mandy, Wiener. We are summarizing what happened yesterday, what was important, what wasn't, what was bizarre, what wasn't. And I want to hear from you as well. You've got questions, you've got inputs, you want to join this conversation, you want to challenge any of what was said. 011-883-0702. Sindile, you calling from Kagiso. Good morning.
Good morning, Clement. I see you guys are singing praises of Ramaphosa. One thing that you've mentioned is that he was defending our country and said we're not going to be bullied. It's not the first time he said that about Trump. He said that in the first term and compared, he said South Africa is not United States. But what I called about is that I'm disappointed that Ramaphosa speaks about the soldiers, but as a chief in command, he has never met the family. He waits for a State of the Nation address to say what he has said about the soldiers, not even sure that he's going to bring them back when. But he never met the families. In the news right now, they are saying families are still in the dark of what's going on with the soldiers. And you go to the State of the Nation address, why don't you call the families together in the presidency office and assure them and tell them what is happening? Even the generals, I doubt they've been there. So what are we saying about this president and the soldiers that we so dearly, when we say we are mourning, we're country mourning? We're not really mourning if we're going to have a president who didn't even speak to the families. It reminds me of people who are in parole. You parole a person without consulting a victim. It's the same thing to me. So this praise of Ramaphosa, it's not the first time he says things like this. Actually, he came back with new promises after he hasn't delivered with the old promises. So for me, with Ramaphosa, the State of the Nation address, you can just go to TV and announce what he's announcing, and let's get rid of it. This halabaloo of military and all those things, these people wearing nice clothes and all those things, it's just a waste of money to listen for a person to speak for 1.5 hours and promises the country nothing.
All right, Cindy,
makes no sense to me.
in Kagiso, thank you so much. And of course, the president has taken a firm stance before. We are very much aware of that. In fact, when did we play that clip of the old clip? Earlier this week, the old clip of Ramaphosa being tough on Trump. It was back in 2018. We played that clip and we even said, even in this moment, he must respond the same way he responded then. When you're a president and the stuff that happens, you don't just say, oh, I've already responded to that 6 years ago, 5 years ago. It calls upon you to do something or to say something sometimes. So it was important that last night, again, he reaffirms the independence of this country and the importance of its sovereignty being respected by everybody else. Is it fair to expect the president to have gone to all the families of the soldiers?
Not to have gone to the families, but to have made sure that representatives of government are in touch with the families. I mean, if he's making the point that the families are in the dark, that's a problem.
Yeah.
They have chaplains in the SNDF. There's a responsibility to recognize that, yes, their children have gone to a volatile mission. They are soldiers. They recognize the responsibility and the threats and the risk that comes with the job. But it is also important, when you speak of being a caring nation and being empathetic, to also actually show it behind the scenes. Because what people look for isn't the platitudes, isn't the messaging. To a point, I understand his frustration. People want to see you live your truth, not just to speak it. So if there's no contact with families, if they're not being updated about what's happening, even when they don't, government doesn't know what's happening, there's got to be a way where you say we're still in the dark. You've got to be able to communicate. It almost speaks to how they dealt with the country last week, where they left us completely in the dark with no answers, with no sense of what's going on.
And then Rwanda occupies the vacuum and then they come
angry,
complain.
And then they're angry.
Yeah,
so
where were you?
You can't do that.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think that the president should be going to the homes.
Yeah,
I
not
mean,
the president.
soldiers
Not the
die
president.
in any other country. That is so sad, and we've got to acknowledge and appreciate that. But I don't think the The president, I'm sure, will be speaking at the funerals or somehow at the event that welcomes them.
Keep in mind also that yesterday the remains of the soldiers were due to be repatriated, and there was a delay.
Yes.
So it was supposed to happen on the same day
And it's
as
tricky there.
Sona.
The
It is
ceasefire is
yeah,
not even holding.
No,
exactly.
it's tricky there.
So I do think
The
that
airport has
that's-
been damaged.
there needs to be a demonstration by the president that empathy is genuine. Perhaps if you see a visual of him accepting the coffins.
I was about
as
to
they-
say
as
that's
what I-
that's
that's
what we see around
Yeah.
the world. If
That's
it
what's
arrives
going to
at
happen.
Barter
That's what
Cliff,
will happen.
Yeah.
I think.
That's
I
what we
suppose.
expect, but
Yeah.
I think my only point there is him saying the family's in the dark. The president doesn't have to do it, but the SNDF has a responsibility to the families in that regard.
And
or the defense minister at least.
at the very least, yeah. And I know that, I mean, some families who were in the news said we heard from the SNDF general when he was in parliament that the repatriation is the next day.
Yeah, it
It's
can't
like
be.
they didn't communicate, and I agree that there must be
It's
better
careless.
communication.
It's careless.
Of
You don't deal with people
they can't
like
just
that.
hear from the from the television. Tebogo, this is Tebogo Khas who's calling us now, as well from Public Interest South Africa. Tebogo, thanks for calling, brother. How are you?
I'm okay, thanks. And how are you, Clement?
Sure. Go ahead.
And greetings to your panel as well. Look, we are very appreciative of the announcement by the president that a bill will be introduced this term around improving whistleblowing ecosystem, because we believe that the changes to the framework are long overdue.
Yeah.
And we just hope this is just not lip service, and it will take foot this session of Parliament, and to make sure that actually it gets to be implemented speedily, because also processing bills can also take long. We hope that it will still be passed and assented to before this Parliament concludes its term. And other than that, we are also appreciative of the acknowledgement that there's a need for speedy prosecution in regards to state capture matters. And also, the president ought to have made it clear. I know that we probably know that the president tends not to want to speak publicly, but he would have read the right. We wish that he would have read the Riot Act to both the NPA and the Department of Justice to stop this public bickering and spread of allegations. It doesn't do well in terms of fostering trust in the system.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so embarrassing, Dabucho, how they've just been fighting, and it's just happening just publicly. They're not talking to each other. Thanks for your call. Dabucho Khas is with Public Interest South Africa. In fact, Dabucho is one of the people who organize the Whistleblower Awards. They've got
Correct.
something like
He
that
does
every year.
a lot of work lobbying for whistleblowers and whistleblower acknowledgement. And you can hear there that he's saying that this is long overdue. And this is the sentiment. If you speak to any whistleblower, they'll tell you that this is the big concern, is that there's not the required urgency when it comes to introducing this legislation. You still have somebody like Athol Williams who's sitting in the UK because he cannot come back to this country or raise finances. And this is the concern, is that if state capture 2.0 rolls around again, we will not have whistleblowers that will come forward unless we get this legislation in place.
Let's go to some WhatsApp voice notes on 072 702 1702.
Good morning, Clement, and good morning to your guests as well. I didn't actually listen to the Sona, but I caught snippets here and there. But I think for me, I've got question marks around why is the discussion around a medium-term development plan versus a national development plan. Have they perhaps decided to dump that because they see that those targets are unrealistic and unachievable and that they're falling behind? But why are they rephrasing of that term? This is Gokeso from Juba.
Well, the difference is the NDP is Vision 2030. So that's a more long term, and the medium term, it's medium, which is the next 5 years, I think.
But also the NDP is an ANC-driven policy.
Which the DA, though, has supported in the past.
Well, and the medium-term development plan is
the product.
GNU.
Yeah, it's a product of this GNU. Here's another WhatsApp.
Shout out to the three of you guys. Yesterday, you've done a brilliant job. I've listened from 6 p.m. until, I think, after 9. I think you've done a brilliant job analyzing post-Sona, pre-Sona, if I can put it that way. think you guys were brilliant. The speech has always been good. I hope the implementation are going to be good as well. The 3 years of infrastructure, 940 something billion. Please don't tell Mandy, don't forget 12, we still need you. Don't go home early. We like listening to your analysis every time. Thank you, Sfisa.
I may just give her a day of Sfiso, eh? I mean,
What, like you my boss?
yeah, I'll be your boss today.
I'll be here at 12.
Clement, good morning. Israel Krugersdorp. Look, the sauna yesterday, Clement, it was, the Ramaphosa gave him 10 out of 10. But that's not the reason for my call. The reason why I call you is I just wanted to applaud you guys. I mean, you did a sterling job there. I mean, having all those 4 brains in mind, I mean, in that studio, I mean, you've got a great minds there. I mean, Tshidi, Madia, Mandy, Wiener, Lindsay, Dentlinger, and Clement Manyathela. The 4 of you guys are unbelievable. I just love how you guys analyzed that sauna for yesterday. I mean, this is exactly how I saw myself as well. But the way you guys, you're putting it into perspective, I just love it. I mean, you guys, you rock. Well done, Clement. Well done, brother. A great show as always. Thanks, man. Bye.
Okay, just to be clear, we didn't pay him any money to say such wonderful
I
things
suspect
about
you
us.
did. It sounds like you paid a little bit of money. I mean,
Okay, so I want to move on now to something else. Local government and the dysfunction at local government. The president spoke about the challenges in municipalities. He said that local government systems are a problem. We need to consult to develop an updated white paper on local government to outline a modern and fit for purpose local government system, because I mean municipalities don't have a viable and sustainable revenue base, and government needs to come up with new ideas on how to fix this. And Lindsay, I wonder if, because every single year at SONA, the president will talk about the dysfunction at municipalities and will always somehow announce, like, I remember there was a time there was a back to basics.
And there was the district model.
There was a district development model.
he still speaks about the
Oh my
district development
Yes, but
model. In
he-
fact,
Yeah.
last night he used eThekwini as an example of why it works. Many
Say
people have been like,
eThekwini?
oh,
eThekwini.
many people last night
eThekwini.
made an argument that the DDM model is not viable and that it's falling away. But he continues to hammer
spoke
that
about
this
that.
is the way forward, and saying that the changes in Durban are due particularly to the success of the DDM and the potential it has to turn around other local municipalities. Sorry, Lindsay.
We've had so
Lindsay.
many of like district development. I remember when Pravin Gordhan was the minister of Kokta, it was the back to basics model. When Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, it was something else. When it was William Keys, it was something else.
And now we're going to have Mr. Shlabisa, who's going to have to tell us. I think a lot of detail is required there, especially about the ring fencing that he spoke about of revenue and making the point that revenue collection is not being used in developing infrastructure in these municipalities. So I think a lot of attention we're going to have to look very strongly at Minister Shlabisa as to exactly how is that going to work, because as you said, there've been just so many different promises and models and shifting, and the reality is municipalities are in an absolute shambles, and that's really the very start of all the promises that they make, whether water, electricity, infrastructure, all of it. We keep looking at national government, but it is actually at the local government level where all of this actually needs to happen and needs to work properly.
Yeah, and he even said last night that they will have to merge some of the municipalities. But this was in a white paper already.
And they're reviewing the funding models as
Yes.
well,
Yes.
which I think is important. Can anyone say local government election loading?
Yeah. And how
All
many
over in
days?
big
Everywhere,
sparkling,
right?
flashing
So
lights.
this is going to be
yeah.
the big focus, right? We've got a
Yeah.
local government election loading in 18 months, and the president is very aware of the fact that where the ANC fails is at
Yeah.
municipal level,
Yeah.
and there's going to have to be a massive focus on municipal service delivery. So that's why there's this big address of water specifically, and electricity, and the funding models for municipalities, because that is going to be the next battleground between the ANC and the GNU partners.
Absolutely.
So he knows that they are going to have to find a way to address the way that municipalities function. If you look at the Auditor General's report and how dire it is.
Every year.
You spoke about eThekwini. I want to fight both of you on this, right? Because I put a post up on social media a couple of months ago. In November, I was in eThekwini, and I noticed, I went for a walk on the promenade at North Beach, that service delivery had improved. And I spent a lot of time with community journalists. I was doing training, whistleblower training actually for community journalists. And they spoke about how dire the situation is in terms of service delivery in other parts of the city. But in the CBD and where tourists are going, obviously, services were really impressive.
It's because it's tourism, Mandy, because they've been hard hit in the city where tourism is often peaking. I think it's an attempt to clean up what brings in money into the city. So I won't be surprised. I'm not surprised hearing that journalists are saying outside of where the scrutiny is or the public eye is, where people pay attention, things are dire. And if you listen to, reports from Tantamaba, so our colleague in KZN, it is dire. It is very much like what you hear in other municipalities that are dysfunctional in our country. It is the back and forth. And I'm not trying to stereotype KZN, but part and parcel of that picture often comes with violence. When you speak about local government elections loading, I think about the candidate selection process and how that is characterized by inter-party violence. So those things are very much a reality, but they it's like a PR exercise. They're managing where people are watching, and the value or the importance rather should be to step outside and look at what the bigger picture actually is as well.
I was interested in how the president also spoke about traditional leaders, and that will work with traditional leaders to ensure they continue with their own work as natural and indigenous leaders of our people. And I thought, wow, what a way to counter the MK party, because that's the message they've been pushing, that we're giving back power to traditional leaders. Here's the president saying, we're going to work with you guys.
That's the only thing I thought about when I heard that line. I was like, we see what this is. Again, going back to, I think it was Mandy, or both Lindsay and Mandy mentioned this, it's the balancing act. You've got to appease so many people in a single speech, speak so many sectors of society and try and make them happy. Former President Jacob Zuma is very big on traditional leaders. In fact, all our political leaders make an attempt to get close to traditional leaders. If you looked at some point when Dino was still in the province of KZN, they would try and meet with the different traditional groupings. If you look at Herman Mashaba, he's attempted to do it. We know the ANC does it, EFF's tried to do it, but the person who does it really well is former President Jacob Zuma. If you're watching in Limpopo, the Bapedi royalties, there's suddenly this weird back push and pull around them, with Ngakura Mahlodi suddenly becoming the Prime Minister of the Bapedi. That tells you that there's something brewing there, and I think that's what he tried to speak to.
Absolutely. Okay, what have we not spoken about? I'm basically trying to check my notes here. We've spoken about the economy, we've spoken about SOEs. Government is relaunching gov.za platform. Can we clap to that? Because, my goodness, government systems are old. They make it very difficult for people to have easy access to government services. So there's a digital, whether it's the visa system, which of course Leon Schreiber, the Minister of Home Affairs, has been pushing for already. But this new government system is going to help with the backlog, with reducing corruption. But again, is it just an announcement, or will it happen?
Now, the use of artificial intelligence, I think this is the first SONA where we've heard artificial intelligence being included. Next, I think SONA's game, the speech is going to be written by artificial intelligence.
There'll be a robot there next to the president.
Yeah, but it's also the first time that he's actually made mention of that as a means to counter corruption in terms of applications, as you say, whether that be visas or any other kind of documents. So, as Mandy mentioned earlier, that is a big drive of the DA, digitizing everything, and they are in control of the departments where we can really make it happen. But as we know and we see repeatedly in Parliament, everybody will come and complain about CETA and that they are really hamstringing the ability for digitization to properly take effect and to properly take hold, because everybody's beholden on the state IT company that's just letting down departments and not making it possible for them to digitize and to use technology properly.
The point I made to Minister Solly Malatsi last night was, I think this speech was far less ideological than it has been in the past. It was very much nuts and bolts and what the plans are, but it was far more idealistic, I think. And again, I think this is the hand of the DA, where you have somebody like Minister Leon Schreiber, and then you've got Minister Solly Malatsi, and it's a very ambitious project to try and digitize everything effectively. And I think if they manage to pull that off, it will be a a great coup for the GNU, because the DA can say, look what we have achieved in government. Whether they can actually do it practically, I think, is the big question. But it would really transform, as the president says, our relationship with government.
Absolutely.
Because if it means going into a home affairs department, if it means getting your driver's license, if it means all of that stuff is made easier, then I think that impacts perceptions.
Just quickly, the irony when the president said all police stations have victim-friendly services. And I thought, wasn't there a video that went viral a couple of days ago of a woman who was beaten by police officers as she was trying to open a case of domestic violence? I still think we still have a long way to go on that front. Ladies, as always, you've been brilliant. Thank you so much for making time to give us some analysis and dissect what happened yesterday.
Thanks, Clement.
Siyabulela. That's Tshidi, Madia, Lindsay, Dentlinger, and Mandy Wiener. And yes, Mandy will be back on her show at 12 o'clock. It's 2 minutes before.
The Midday Report.
Weekdays,
12